name is Hannah Howard, and I am a research assistant at the Athens Institute for Education and Research in Athens, Greece. I'm here today with Dr. Robert Sindelar from Canada. How are you today?
Fine, hello.
Hi. So let's begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your education.
Sure. Currently I'm a professor in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences at the University of British Columbia. I most recently had served as Vice President for Innovation Research and Academics for Providence Healthcare, which is part of a healthcare organization, part of the public healthcare system in British Columbia, Canada. I did that on leave from the university when I finished my two terms as Dean of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences. And I grew up academically in the U.S. at the University of Mississippi, where I was department head and dean.
Great, thank you so much. So how were you introduced to Athens?
I've received requests about suggested topics and individuals that might be interested in attending over several years, and often wondered about the conference. I met a couple people in Canada that had talked about this conference in the past, and I'm at that stage in my career where I want to be able to talk about the way things can change in both pharmaceutical sciences and the way we use pharmacists in the healthcare system, and so thought that this as an international conference might be an interesting venue by which to present things like that.
Was that your main inspiration for attending this particular conference, or were there other reasons as well?
Well, it was really probably that, and smaller groups, so the opportunity to really have more of a dialogue rather than to present where there's very little chance to have questions and discussion. Many conferences always run long, which means there's almost never time for questions. And, this conference provides ample time for dialogue and to meet people. And so that's always an interesting aspect of travel to a conference.
Absolutely, all good perks. So tell us a little bit more about your major area of research within pharmaceutical sciences.
Well, my research predominantly, I'm a medicinal chemist by training and education, and have been involved in medicinal chemistry, computer-aided drug design, drug discovery, quite a bit around immune modulation over the years. Have probably about 70 peer-reviewed publications,
Wow.
8 patents, I believe. I've delivered quite a couple hundred different discussions. But the last certainly 15 to 20 years, I've been more in administration. Dean, as I said, vice president within a healthcare system. I was president of a research institute of 350 researchers.
Oh, wow.
We did about $50 million US research at that time. And even now I serve to help put together, even back at the university, part of my role is to help structure a fairly significant institute in collaboration with a group in China to take academic discoveries from North America and work on them collaboratively between China and North America.
Were you happy with the interplay of academia and research and administration in your work?
Yeah, it's always interesting, and it's nice to watch the development of the careers of those individuals you're able to bring into the organizations that you play some leadership role. And so that's been nice, and I do like connecting the dots, putting the pieces together. It's I don't know that I spent much time with puzzles when I was a kid or growing up, but certainly as an adult I find I spend more and more time doing things like that. And the roles I've played certainly in the last 5 years have been more specifically at the request of the Deputy Minister of Health, and trying to work within the healthcare system to move academic ideas forward. How do you create a hospital of the future? How do you get healthcare professionals across multiple disciplines to work together in teams, things like that.
Sure. So did your presentation at this conference have to do with one of those puzzle pieces?
Well, it certainly it will,
research?
and it'll come up in a little bit. I'll be presenting on how do you think in terms of not purely delivering care, but how do you think in terms of health and wellness in a omics based on genomics and all the multiple variations in an omics or genomics era. And that becomes extremely important. It's not only the concept that you could do a whole genome scan, or you can do some metabolomics analysis or a proteomics analysis, but the reality is, how do you really do something with that, and how do you fundamentally change the way people do things or behave and use that information so that their continuum of life, they're healthier during the longest part of the continuum of their life.
So how do you fundamentally change that?
Well, that's a part of it. The nature is how do you put the pieces together, and
Sure.
part of it, I think, is the no doubt finding the right ways to collect that information. How do you convert an organization into becoming what we might call a continuous learning healthcare organization? In other words, absolutely every interaction with a patient and their family somehow generates some information that you save and somehow use for the benefit of somebody else down the road. And so that's part of it. So it gets into the concepts of big data, and I hate that term. And, how do you collect all this information? How do you use all that information? And I think that's really it. It's more than just how do we do a whole genome sequence and pay for it within the system? But once you have that information, how do you deal with it? How do you empower people to take charge of their health? How do you coach them? And I think that's part of it. I think the two big things that we're learning as all sorts of projects are going on around the world is the concept that individuals on their own find it difficult to change, but to really move from being a healthcare provider to actually a coach seems to be one aspect of it. And the second thing is this concept of what we might refer to as deep phenotyping, the idea that we not only know a set of things about you that have some basis due to the your genomic makeup.
Sure.
But we really understand in great depth. We know not only that you were a smoker, but we know the period of time that you smoked. When you stopped smoking, what did you do from that point on? We know much more about the whole nature of your health and those things that have intervened. So the electronic health record, it's really building a complete look at you in a very deep way that starts to intersect with all this fantastic new science information that we're getting, genomics and proteome. We know a little bit more of you at the DNA level and at the RNA level and at the protein level and at the functional level and at the metabolism level and now at the microorganism gut level. And once you kind of put all those things together, wow, you can start making some true decisions.
So are those new looks and pieces of information being used primarily for the development of better individual treatment or for some society-wide perspectives as well?
Well, I'd say yes and yes, in the sense that we will always, by doing that, you're going to learn more and more about individuals and depth of those individuals. But where I guess the difference is if you had cancer, quote, cancer, and came in, and based on, quote, the type of cancer, let's say breast cancer, there's a certain treatment or treatments that somebody would follow based on a set of guidelines. Now what we know is there isn't something called breast cancer. There's literally hundreds of things called breast cancer, all really quite individual. And so we understand that at a more individual level.
Sure.
But part of the concepts of what I will talk about is this whole idea that what we want isn't the fact that we've now treated literally tens of thousands of people this way. What we want to do is pull out the 4 to 6 people that have exactly, from a deep phenotype sense, similar to you. And therefore, this is what didn't work for them and this is what worked. Okay, so you're using this breadth and depth of information, okay, to come back to the individual. That's why when you start looking at this, British Columbia is a population of about 4.8 million people. Okay, to be honest, you're starting to look into the, not just 2 and 3 and 4 million, but you're looking at 10, 12 million and building up databases through collaborations and consortium and things like that. So you get a real depth and breadth of information, of which then you're pulling out those very unique things that are in that deep phenotyping, make somebody in that database, okay, look like the individual you're now going to treat.
Sure.
And then you use that as a way to start.
Offers a
Rather
real
than
chance
just
for
a
lot of
typical
progress.
set of guidelines that a society, either in oncology or cardiovascular disease or diabetes, has suggested as a way to start.
Very interesting. Well, it looks like it's going to be a really interesting presentation.
Well, what hopes?
I'm sure it will be. So at this conference, you also had the chance to panel a session, correct?
Yes, it did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That was interesting because it included 3 PhD engineering students, and they All three were part of at least 5 individuals that co-authored each of the papers that were presented, and all 3 of them were different, but they were in the general area of biomedical engineering. 2 were around membranes, the third was around creating sort of what might be looked at as an artificial organ, but the concept of replacing the normal biological processes of a membrane or an organ, in this case the organ is a kidney, and sort of engineering something to replace it. So those were interesting. Plus it's always exciting to listen to PhD students who are tremendously excited about their work and want to tell the world about it.
Sure, future of the field, for sure. We try to pull from all over those. So thank you for offering that information for us. Our last question has to do more about your experience in general with education, particularly within your field.
Sure.
So I'm curious what you have seen to be advantages and challenges of the educational system in your country, and specifically within your field.
Well, I think Canada is a little unique in the sense that pharmaceutical sciences is a generally small area. It's the pharmaceutical sciences and pharmacy education really serves several purposes. It usually is the professional program that educates the pharmacist to enter into the health profession of pharmacy. Then there also is the research, both in the health system, the delivery of care, the role of pharmacy and pharmacist, plus those in both the pharmaceutical sciences, which are things like medicinal chemistry, pharmacology, pharmacognosy or natural products, pharmaceutics and drug delivery, drug optimization, drug development, those sorts of things, and improving those processes and or creating new molecular entities that could potentially have the chance to become a drug down the road. And so the education has changed in a number of different ways. I think in Canada is somewhat special that way. Unique, it's a small enough country, a country of about 30 million with only 10 pharmacy programs, that the deans of pharmacy could get together, and we started this when I served as president of the Deans of Pharmacy of Canada, and we brought the key stakeholders together, government representatives, the regulatory bodies, the advocacy groups around pharmacy, the business, the chain, pharmacy chains and independent operators, and then the academics and pharmaceutical scientists, that started talking about if you were to sort of re-engineer all of pharmacy education, what would that start to look like? We asked the Pharmacy Advocacy Group for Canada, the Canadian Pharmacists Association, to sort of lead that without owning it, and then they took that on once the deans got sort of started. And those groups worked together for several years and created a blueprint for pharmacy that talked about how pharmacy and pharmaceutical education would change entirely in the country. Now that was a rather unique experience, and I think it's made a difference because what you found is the role of pharmacist really continued to change in the country, and it's one of the more advanced in terms of the broadness of what happens. The concept that it isn't just a matter of a series of pilot projects, but it's really brought across the profession in each of the provinces, and the health care is the purview of each province, so each province is a little different. But the role of the pharmacist continues to change and expand and become much more of a clinical patient focused profession. And the sciences around that have focused in another way too, taking in the genomic sciences and the nature of that, plus really developing great strengths in the concepts of health outcomes and pharmaceutical outcomes, and what's the quality of the outcome that one gets from pharmaceutical intervention.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. That's all our questions for today.
That's great. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here. We hope you enjoy the rest of your time.
Enjoy the rest of the sessions.